Hi, and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Better Call Saul Season 2, Episode 5, Rebecca. This video is a part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Better Call Saul, so I have to give a spoiler warning. For up to Better Call Saul Season 2, Episode 5. If you have not seen up to this point, you may not want to watch this video, otherwise some things will be spoiled for you. So, it seems like mid-season, pretty much every show I watch has to throw at least one slow-paced filler episode in the middle of the season. Shows like The Walking Dead and Vikings just had filler episodes, and it looks like Better Call Saul is doing the same with this episode. That being said, for a filler episode, it was quite interesting, and there were a few interesting tidbits in there that are worth noting, so I'm not saying that it's horrible by any means of the imagination. But not much really happened in this episode, did it? So we start off with a flashback scene where we meet Rebecca, from whom the episode derives its name. I must assume that this is Chuck's wife, and I also have to assume that she's either dead or perhaps she left Chuck because the two of them aren't together anymore. If Jimmy was the reason that she left Chuck, that would certainly explain the bad blood between them, but I'm not sure that that is the case. However, that wasn't the point of the scene. The point of the scene was to show how jealous Chuck is of Jimmy, which is something I've been saying for a long time, because in this scene we see Chuck warning Rebecca about Jimmy, but she ends up liking him instantly. In fact, he really entertains her, and when Chuck tries to tell the same jokes, she wasn't nearly as amused. So Jimmy has a way with people, even his own wife, that Chuck doesn't have and that he is jealous of. And I think this scene is very important to remind us of how jealous he is, because it's easy to overlook it. In fact, some people don't notice at all. I've seen a few other reviewers saying that Chuck is absolutely right about Jimmy and totally in the right, but that's clearly not the case. The events of the rest of the episode may reinforce this belief that Chuck is in the right, but that's why this scene was so important, because it gives you the necessary reminder that he is not in the right. He's just jealous, and he has a lot of other less than moral motivations that he isn't willing to admit to himself. So when we jump back to the present, we get a couple of scenes that is the slow-paced filler that I was talking about. I see how it is necessary in general, but I don't think we needed to get so much of it, and it just tends to drag. Like, we get introduced to Aaron, who's essentially becoming Jimmy's chaperone, as I'm sure he's on a short lease now with Davis and Maine. And of course, we did meet Aaron before, as she was in several meetings, but I never thought of her as anything more than a minor background character. But now all of a sudden, she's more important, which is cool. And then we get several really drawn out scenes with Kim doing the busy work and Jimmy trying to help her, but she brushes him off and says she wants to dig herself out of this mess. So we get a long scene with her calling a bunch of people trying to find a great client for HHM, and then we get a montage of her doing the same thing. Now, I know that it's important to show how hard she worked to get this client, but did we really need a long scene and a long montage? Seemed like a bit overkill to me. But after she busts her ass and gets this great client who's really impressed with her, Hamlin doesn't care and keeps her down doing the dirty work. So, the important takeaway I get from these scenes is that Kim rightfully was sick of Jimmy's bullshit and didn't want him interfering and wanted to work herself up from the rut she's in. So she's already looking down on him, but then she had this talk with Chuck. So what's interesting is that Jimmy is convinced that it's all Chuck's doing and he's the one holding her back. However, later we find out Hamlin's the one who's mad at her rather than Chuck, because he stuck up for Jimmy on Kim's word, so he's taking this betrayal more personally. Of course, if she did just told him that she didn't know what Jimmy was up to in the first place, it might not be so bad with her, but of course you can't do that because reasons. Anyway, I found her little discussion with Chuck rather interesting, and Chuck promises to speak to Hamlin on her behalf. And I do think it will work because Hamlin respects what Chuck has to say. So it looks like Chuck is the hero, right? Well, the thing is, he didn't promise to stick up for her until after he had this little chat with her about Jimmy and how he's not to be trusted. And he tells the story of how Jimmy disappointed his father the way he disappoints everyone. So in other words, he had to sour her to Jimmy because she's the main reason Jimmy got his job in the first place. So essentially, Chuck is just playing her in order to get to Jimmy. I'm sure if she started sticking up for Jimmy again, he would all of a sudden turn on her again. Jimmy's right about one thing. Chuck doesn't care about Kim either way. It's all about Jimmy. I'm still not sure which way Kim's going to go. My guess is she will cut ties with Jimmy, or at least try to, but we'll see how that goes. So this gets back to what I was saying about Rebecca, because at first glance it would appear Chuck's totally in the right after the story about his father and Jimmy's behavior. We can even see in this episode how he can't help himself. But that's where the Rebecca scene is so important, because it illustrates this isn't about Jimmy and how reliable or unreliable he is. It's about Chuck's own jealousy and feelings of resentment towards him. And even if Chuck kind of does have a point about Jimmy not being able to behave himself, this isn't about that. It's about Chuck's petty resentment and jealousy, plain and simple. Chuck is not at all in the right here. So getting back to the courthouse scene, that was pretty cool. It starts off with Jimmy seeing Mike in his beaten up state with the giant black eye, and I absolutely love his jokes here when he says, "Oh, first rule of Fight Club" and all that. And then they drove away. While they were driving away, he was humming the Rocky theme song. This was kind of a callback to Breaking Bad when Jesse had the piss beat out of him and had a messed up face. Saul also made Rocky jokes saying, "Hey, Adrian." So that was a nice little callback. And the Fight Club reference does work for this timeline, as this is set in 2002 when Fight Club came out in 1999, so Fight Club is still fresh in people's minds. So the rest of the courthouse scene was cool, as we get the few people from that appeared in earlier on in season 1, as Jimmy tries to bribe that same clerk he always did, but can't because his new chaperone won't let him. Goes to show he was always being the more sleazy type lawyer that a huge firm like Davis & Maine wouldn't accept. But was more interesting was Jimmy's encounter in the bathroom with that prosecutor guy who always used to butt heads with Jimmy at the start of season 1. I was just thinking the other day about how funny this guy was. I used to love this guy. So it was great to see him again. And of course, he was just super jealous of Jimmy's new position at Davis & Maine, going on and on about his company car, his flash new office, and all of that stuff. But what was really interesting was the conversation was, it was obvious that Jimmy wasn't at all happy with any of these new flashy things. In fact, he tried to play it off like these things aren't really that great, and I don't think that's because he's being modest. I think that's because he really doesn't think those things are that great. And with Aaron breathing down his neck, things are only getting worse. So I predict by the end of the season, he will not be working for Davis & Maine anymore. He'll either quit or purposely sabotage himself. Now, I'd still like to see some origins of him to become Saul Goodman, but I doubt that they will come in any major way in this season. But still, I expect him that he won't be working for Davis & Maine by the end of the season. So we end the episode with Mike meeting someone at a cafe. I saw this in the preview for the episode, and they were hiding this guy's identity, so I knew it would be a Breaking Bad cameo. I kind of thought it would be Gus, but I don't think we'll get him until much later. Instead, it's Tio Salamanca, otherwise known as the guy in the wheelchair who rings a bell. I must admit, I was surprised to see him walking about and talking just fine. As I understand, this show only takes place, I believe, somewhere around like 6 years before Breaking Bad takes place. So that doesn't really leave that much time in between for him to get paralyzed. I actually wonder if we'll see that happen in the show. Who knows? Maybe. Anyway, he offers Mike $5,000 to claim the gun that they found on Tuco was his in order to lessen Tuco's sentence, but to do so would probably mean jail time for him. And Mike was very noticeably pissed off at the offer. I honestly don't know which way he's going to go, if he's going to purposely defy Tio or if he plans on doing what he asks in order to get the money. We'll just have to see. So my rating for Rebecca out of 10 is a 6 good. As I said, it was a slow-paced filler episode that dragged on a bit longer than it needed to, but there were still a lot of interesting tidbits and character interactions in this episode, like Chuck talking to Kim, seeing Jimmy reconnect with his old courthouse buddies, and that was always funny, of course. And the best thing about the episode is that it emphasized Chuck's motives here had more to do with jealousy and resentment than they do with any sort of moral high ground. So that's it for my review of Rebecca. Be sure to check back here every week as I review episodes of Better Call Saul. Also be sure to check out my channel for many other videos on shows like Game of Thrones, Star Trek, The Walking Dead, Vikings, House of Cards, and be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.